Hello, and welcome to Talking with Machines. I'm Mark Corbett Wilson, a lifelong learner, artist, and retired high-tech glassblower. I spent 2 decades working in Surveillance Valley, making gas lasers, X-ray tubes, and the high-intensity lamps used in the manufacture of computer chips. Now, I'm a critical digital humanist, the learning technologian at the Western Institute for Social Research in Berkeley, California, and a digital storytelling facilitator with storycenter.org. In sum, I'm a working class educator in third spaces who helps people glean meaning from experiences and tell their stories. Today, I'm joined by Bryan Alexander, Tom Haymes, and Stephen Downes. Friends, please introduce yourselves.
Hello, I'm Bryan Alexander, a futurist specializing in the future of higher education. I'm based in the Washington, D.C. area, where I'm a senior scholar at Georgetown University, teaching in their learning design and technology program. I make a lot of media, including the weekly Future Trends Forum, as well as publishing scholarly books. My most recent, Universities on Fire, was an examination of the future of higher education and climate change. My book that I'm finishing right now, Peak Higher Education, takes a look at problems in American higher education over the next 10 to 20 years. Over to you, Tom.
Hi, I'm Tom Haymes. I'm a consultant, founder of Idea Spaces, and currently developing the AI startup Knowledge Navigator product. I've been an educator for 25 years, a photographer for longer than that, and a technologist for longer than that. So, I'll let Mark usher in our guest.
Well, yeah, Stephen, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself in the way you choose?
So I'm Stephen Downes. I'm a lowly public servant from Canada. That's actually true. I haven't founded companies or written books because I'm less commercially inclined. I actually do work for the government, the National Research Council of Canada, to be precise, and I'm actually in my government office at the moment, which isn't normally where you see me, but that's why the background is beige. I've been in the field for, I don't know, 30 years, give or take. Writing scholarly books is commercially inclined, says Bryan. Yes, it is. We can talk about that if you want. So what have I done? I've done a lot of work in learning technology and new instructional media over the years, starting with learning objects, content management systems, RSS, massive open online courses, connectivism, personal learning environments, as the title says, ethics, analytics, and the duty of care, and so on. And if someone paid me a 6-figure advance, maybe I'd think about a book, but I don't think that's going to happen.
Okay, so today I wanted us to talk about ethics and the duty of care more than anything else. But AI will creep in as it does everywhere. So I was impressed with the way you set up your cMOOC, Ethics, Analytics, and the Duty of Care, in that it was so open that a person didn't even have to register. They could take the entire, and it's still up. You can still go and take the entire course anonymously. And so I thought we'd start off. I just ask you about how you got to that kind of construct of an online course.
Okay, well, that takes us back to the beginning days of MOOCs. And it probably takes us back even further. So the MOOC emerged, of course, when George Siemens approached me. This was after he had held his successful Connectivism conference and he wanted to host an online course. And I said, great. The course was going to be about connectivism, and the common problem that we faced was that nobody understood what connectivism is. Fair enough, it's a pretty niche topic. So what I suggested is that we set up the course as a connectivist course. Now, George and I aren't completely in sync on what exactly connectivism is, but there's enough in common that we knew we wanted it to be a networked course. We knew we wanted it to focus on the connections rather than the content. We knew we wanted it to be an open course, even though George was working at the University of Manitoba at the time and had some requirements with them to have some actual students in the course. And we wanted it to be decentralized. We didn't want to have the course in one single location. So we set that up. George set up a Moodle instance. I set up an instance of software that I had been working on for my newsletter and for RSS and for a bunch of other things called Grasshopper. And we connected these to a bunch of other services using RSS so that we could have people participate in any one of these different places that they wanted. I would just gather all the content together and then distribute it in a daily newsletter. And that's how we got our course. And that structure basically has persisted over the years to become the structure of the ethics, analytics, and duty of care course. And again, it's the idea, I want it to be a distributed and most important of all, open online course. And to me, open means no registration. You don't have to sign over your email address, your dog's blood type, whatever. You just go and you access the course. That's all you do. And so we ran through, as I created a course, and you were with me there, Mark, we ran through all the different sections. There were talks in the sections. I gathered it all together at one point. There's literally, I'm not exaggerating, 1,000 slides. It's actually just a shade over 1,000. And then if you take the transcript of the sessions that I did for the course, there's just over, it's like something like 1,080-page transcript. So there's a ton of material there. I condensed it and put it into an article, which is now available as well. But really, the heart of the course is those 1,000 slides and that 1,000-page non-book. I'm tempted to have an AI try to summarize that. I'm not sure it's summarizable. Oh, I mean, I could summarize it, but I don't think the AI could.
I know you
Tom
do a
or
lot
Bryan?
I know you do a lot of stuff with open. I'm curious you just mentioned AI, but how do you see, I know early on there was some resistance slash questioning of AI stuff on the open side. But I'm curious how you see AI interacting with the future of open.
There's still a lot of resistance to AI in the open community, and it's interesting because I think it points to a certain degree how the open community changed over time too. I mean, it isn't the same now as it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago. It's changed quite a bit. The pushback, I mean, there's two sides to the pushback. And neither side is accurate to my mind, but I'll summarize them. One side is the pushback on the capacity of the AI to actually do the job it's being asked to do, right? And what it's being asked to do is maybe robot tutor or produce OERs or whatever. We'll talk about that, and people say, "Oh, it's just not possible. The AI can't do it." I think the AI probably can do it, but the second side is the source of a lot of the activity in AI recently has been large corporate enterprises, OpenAI, Meta, these companies we all adore and love. And yeah, right. And there's a lot of pushback from the open community because it's a big corporate activity that is taking pretty much all content and turning it into an application they can sell money for. So big pushback. But to my mind, I think AI in general is a really useful technology, and therefore I think it should be widely accessible and not something that's just produced by large corporations. So I am supportive of the concept of, actually open AI, not the company, but the concept. Um, and that is going to require uh, the ability of AI to access open content. Without open
Sure.
content, you don't get open AI, period, end of story. So I'm, in significant disagreement with a lot of the opposition.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I'm writing about the last week or so, and we had a big discussion on another podcast last night about copyright in AI, but is that I think AI actually demands a certain level of openness in order to be useful. And when I say AI, I do not mean ChatGPT. I mean like what we talked about a couple weeks ago, which was, retrieval augmented generation of, RAGs. I use Notebook LM, which is a Google product, but there are others out there that you can, obviously there's truly open AI. There's, a number of products that Hugging Face and there's Mistral and others that are, use open code. But to me, the most useful thing about it is not the information it can retrieve, but the connections it can make between the information you have.
Yeah.
And from a teaching perspective, I find a really intriguing pathway to pursue as a way of, I know, as a teacher, let's get a realistic estimate of how much of your textbooks your students actually read, you know? And the question that I mean, I had this discussion in a conversation I was having with somebody this morning, but the question isn't, oh God, they're never going to read again because of AI or because of digital or whatever. The question is, why aren't they reading? Or why aren't they consuming the information? Or maybe we need to make the information available in a way that's more consumable. Are books and reading in the traditional format the best way to do that? And to me, a book is a container of ideas, and I want to get at the ideas. I love books, I love to read, but I'm more interested in what's in the book or what's in the content than I am than I am about the physical manifestation of the book or being able, it depends on what I'm doing too. I mean, I read for enjoyment, of course, but there are a lot of books that I have that I just need to get the information out of, and don't have time to read for enjoy, slowly. Um, but to me, AI, open and AI seem like a natural complement to each other on the one hand, and I also think that over time we're going to have to change our copyright regimes to get to a point where we start recognizing this idea that ideas are not the property of a corporation or even an author, but that they're the product of an author assimilating other people's ideas and then putting their own framework on it. And that AI can give us some powerful tools for using those things more effectively. Um, and that to me is the thing I've always had the biggest problem with OER and open in general is that's not a problem, but it seems to me like an economic fallacy is when people come to me and say, we want to create an open educational resource textbook. And I've actually been involved in projects to try to get people to create those things. But a book is a big project, and getting people to work for free, especially if there's professors or people who can work for money and sell a textbook, is a very hard proposition. The economics of it, from the perspective of just getting people to do it, to me, the winning formula with OER has always been, let's chunk it, let's make smaller bits, let's have everybody do a little bit. You know, I could see, for instance, a department getting together and creating their own textbook and combination of materials, and each person is responsible for a section of the course, and then they all teach the same course, but they share that sort of thing. That's always to me been the model that I think would work best with open, as a from a perspective of content's concerned. So I think AI also helps us collect things too, and so I think there's a real opportunity there for using AI to find those open resources that are already out there in some cases, and pulling that together as you're constructing a course or or a course reading. Seems like a real opportunity to me.
Like, it's kind of odd given that we started this by talking about a course that I put online. But I mean, I don't even think in terms of courses. Even the course I put online, I didn't even think of in terms of a course. I thought of it as a collection of resources all linked together in some useful ways. And if you go to the course, you'll see that, you'll see the list of applications of AI, the list of criticisms of AI, the list of all the ethical codes, all interlinked with each other. Which actually was a bit of a development from the previous MOOCs, but still an extension of the capacities of the software to draw these connections between individuals, resources, topics, ideas, etc. And like I have this way of looking at the world where it isn't sliced and diced in courses, or anything really, and it's just this pile of data, pile of information, pile of facts about the world, pile of experiences, events, things that happen, and what any individual is doing is seeing the patterns in that pile.
Mhm.
And that's what a course is an attempt to do, right? Is to extract a longish thread from that pile. And historically, the course evolves when students at a college like Trinity College would ask a professor for a course of lectures. And the professor would say, okay, I'll attempt to deal with this topic over a period of time. And we see AI, now we can do the same thing with AI that those students at Trinity College could do with their professor. And, just create a course on demand, or create a lecture on demand, or create a demonstration on demand. And this whole idea of creating resources up front, whether commercial or non-commercial, forget about that for the moment. The whole idea of creating resources up front in the hope that somebody will eventually discover them and then reuse them, no longer applies. It's no longer a relevant concept for education. What we should be thinking of is twofold. One, finding something that individuals that formerly called students want to do, which addresses a whole range of issues. And then two, making sure that the supports, whether they be content, software, whatever, are available for them to do that, as widely accessibly as possible. And that's, beginning with that kind of model of education, then we rethink what we mean by open educational resources. It's not textbooks, it's not even lessons, classes, it's resources useful to help a person do that thing that they're attempting to do.
Yeah, exactly. Of course, the university professor and me, of course, I don't believe this myself, but I can hear what my colleagues would say would be, oh, but how are we going to grade that, and so on and so forth, and where's the human in that? But these are all, I think, spurious arguments, and I think that AI is going to accelerate the breaking of some of these systems, and not to mention other things as well. I believe Bryan had a question. Go ahead, Bryan.
Oh, shoot, I had all kinds of questions.
His question may be evolving here as the discussion goes.
Well,
We won't
Can-
hold you to
can
your
you
original
lead-
question, Bryan. Just go for it.
Well,
yeah, Bryan, can you tell us how you're thinking about openness in your courses?
well, not in the same way, and it may be because I am part of a program, and there are a lot of structural forces there that shape what I can and cannot do, and also student expectation. My students insist on using an LMS, and the university really recommends it, and so I use Canvas in a pretty basic way, for example. The program is very pro-open, so I try to use as many open education resources as possible, as well as a lot of open access scholarly content for the students to use. I'm saying scholarly content because this is a graduate program, and so learning to read and work with scholarship at the professional level is an important feature. But we do is also assign print books, and what's interesting is my students usually, well, they never go to the textbook store. And they rarely get the print copy. They prefer the ebook in whatever format, but also they really prefer audiobooks, which is interesting. In terms of what students produce, they tend to want to produce behind a barrier. They tend not to want to publish their work for the world. They're pretty happy to have the material available for subsequent classes, but not much more beyond that. I try to follow cats apparently in everything I do. I try to follow open teaching practices. So I usually post my syllabi along with introduction to class ideas to my blog. And then during the semester, depending on what we do, I may do a follow-up describing some practice, some experiment. I'll also take some conversation to less open venues. So there's about 60 people that I know that work in gaming and education. I'll often email them stuff that I don't necessarily share publicly. I use the Reacting to the Past game series a lot. They've got a very, very active community on Facebook, which I participate in, for example. There are other connections through, let me think about this in terms of open. For example, some of my students are active participants in my Future Trends Forum program, which, depending on your sense of open, is different senses of open or not. I don't know, Mark, am I answering your question the way you were thinking of?
Yeah, I just wanted that input from a, from a 4-year university, institutional perspective. So yeah, thank you. That's exactly what I was looking for. If you want to go ahead and ask your question too, I didn't mean to derail you there.
Well, it's okay. I'm a Generation X guy, so I don't like talking about myself, but I'm happy to be polite and to help people out. Stephen, I feel sometimes like on the topic I'm about to mention, there are about 4 of us, I think, that on a given day they're interested in this. And this is using open source AI. I'm sorry?
So I'm sorry, you said 4 of us.
Yes.
I'm just laughing at that.
Well, thinking about open source in generative AI for higher education, almost all the work I'm seeing across higher education is done with proprietary tools, licensing through OpenAI or Google and Microsoft and so on. But I'm kind of flabbergasted to an extent that we're not seeing more either use of OpenAI tools and also use of in teaching, but also in research and producing stuff. And I'm curious if first you would recommend any particular open source or some sense of open source or open AI that you would like academics to work with, and secondly, any kind of interesting projects or practices that you think we could really follow with that.
Yeah, I don't really have anything good for you on the first front. The shortage in AI is more of a hardware shortage than a software shortage, if that makes any sense. All of these concepts, almost all of these concepts, there's a few that weren't, but the basic nuts, the basic algorithmic nuts and bolts of AI were developed before any of these mainstream AI services came online, and created by academic and government researchers, I might add, not by the private sector. And what changed the calculus was that there was private sector involvement, not so much in research, although they did do that, but in hardware. They took the existing work and scaled it 1 billion times. That's obviously an estimate, might be plus or minus an order of magnitude. But you get the idea, right? And that's when we began to get the really interesting results that we got from things like OpenAI. You can run models on your desktop. I mean, I had Hugging Face, a Hugging Face model running on my desktop for a while, and then I looked, and it was like it occupied half my disk.
Yeah.
And I had a great big disk, and I realized that I can't make this work. Similarly, I forget what it was. I had enough. I've had a local chat GPT model. I have Claude running. I was working with that just last week. And again, these things are just sucking up all the resources that I have. And they're not even connected to the internet. So I'm getting, their level of knowledge. I tried to talk to one of them and convince it that there was an election last November and Joe Biden is no longer president, and it wasn't having it. Yeah. So I can't. So until we get consumer grade massive arrays of parallel processors and GPUs and things like that, we're not really in the world of open access AI just yet. So the second part, I'm sorry, I've forgotten it, but
Well, that's quite all right. The second part was, if we had a good answer to the first part, then what are some of the exciting and interesting practices and projects we might do?
Yeah. Because, well, these commercial services are still useful, okay? And we can do a lot of things with them in anticipation of the eventual arrival of, say, a government AI service, a publicly provided AI service, for example, that actually has all of these resources. Or, there's different models. We don't have, there's different models in which this can be provided that aren't, the US mega corporation led by an egomaniac. Many different business models other than that one. And so simple things. I recently built a personal learning environment, which you may have heard of, or maybe not, because it didn't take the world by storm the way I had hoped, but still. One of the things it does is aggregates from RSS feeds, from Mastodon posts, and Blue Sky posts, and brings them all into a single environment. But on the way, what it does is automated translation strictly behind the scenes, so that when I'm using my PLE, I don't care what language the person wrote in, I'm seeing it in my language. And that's all behind the scenes. Another thing it does is if I'm reading Blue Sky, a Blue Sky thread, I can push a button and it summarizes the Blue Sky thread for me. And then I can import that into whatever it is that I'm writing. Another thing it does is if I want to create some new content, I ask it to generate a template on the fly for me for creating that kind of content. It'll create that template and put it into my writing area, and then I can work with that template. Those are three things that I've been playing with, but the idea here is that the AI is producing a useful service that I can then integrate into my workflow. And it's this integration into my workflow that is the really interesting thing for me. And so, again, we come back to talking about open educational resources, right? It's just things that can integrate into my workflow that are really useful to me, some of which may help me learn.
Yeah, so this this sounds like you're reaching, as is Tom, for a MEMX or what's Ted Nelson, Xanadu, some sort of kind of universal aggregator um, that we're all, we all could use. I have stuff scattered all over my computer, and I spend a lot of time looking for bits of text I've generated or images I've saved or images I've generated. Um, what I was thinking of while you were talking, though, was the SETI project, where people aggregated their personal computers worldwide to get the computing power needed. And I think that kind of a model, as somebody pointed out in the chat, is a libertarian, I guess, or anarchist model, but worked up to a point. And at the same time, there is this push for smaller and smaller large language models. I don't like the
Yeah,
AI term at all.
yeah.
But with DeepSeek and as we talked with Dr. Ruben Puente Dora a couple weeks ago, there's this push for the smaller models. People want them on their phones. And so I think those two trends might help us distribute this technology more widely.
And I continue
Yeah.
I continue to advocate for not calling it artificial intelligence. I think it's augmented intelligence, and I think we need to operate in those terms because artificial intelligence implies that it's somehow replacing our intelligence when the really truly useful things that you can do with it are not replacing human thinking or creativity, but augmenting them, giving us better tools to analyze text, to write. And I can give a long laundry list of ways that I use it just to speed up my writing process or to come up with ideas for things to do in my classes or come up with ideas for, um, you know, creating material for the startup I'm working on that make my life more efficient. And that's something that's been the case since I first started using an Apple II Plus in 1981,
And I push back
I've
against the intelligence word myself. As Marvin Minsky said, it's a suitcase word. It means whatever, it means everything to everybody and nothing to anybody at the same time. So in the title of this show, I went with augmented information because I think that's what we're doing is we're, moving the information around. The intelligence is on our side of the screen,
Yeah.
and there's nothing the machine can do about that.
But that's the distinction to me that is the critical distinction as well between artificial intelligence and augmented intelligence, because artificial intelligence implies an externality of that intelligence, whereas augmented intelligence to me says, I am augmenting my intelligence or your intelligence, not that of the machine. And so in that sense, I look at intelligence as my English is completely out the window, but not as a noun, but as an adjective, I guess. Well,
What
no,
something
that's not
implies
right.
is always in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah.
I wore this shirt today, and my wife Andrea looked at that and said, "Well, that's not really appropriate for the workplace." And I thought, what's wrong with federation? And then I realized, right, she was drawing an implication out of this that I wouldn't, right? I look at this, and I also know the designers who used the script from the show Get Smart.
Mm-hmm.
So this implies get smart. Right?
So for our
She,
listeners, I guess I should point out that Stephen is wearing a black t-shirt with white lettering that says "Get Federated."
right.
And I didn't realize that was
Yeah.
the typeface from Get Smart, but I
No,
often
most
think
people don't.
of the TV show and how I learned everything I needed to know back then, that the
Oh,
agents of chaos were coming for me, and all I needed was a very
control.
good phone hidden someplace.
And the same is true of a phrase like artificial intelligence. If there are implications, as opposed to what those words actually mean, they're typically in the eyes of the beholder. The words themselves don't carry those connotations with them. They are added. I look at that now, like the phrase artificial intelligence dates from the 1950s, right? The same age and era as Get Smart, for that matter. And nobody back then would have pretended that any computer system was artificially intelligent, and yet that was the name of the program. So they could not possibly have been thinking that what they were creating was indeed, as the implication suggests, some sort of artificial intelligence. So minimally, the term is aspirational. It's like, this is where we're headed, just like we called it the moon mission long before we actually landed on the moon, right? And if somebody had come along and said, well, you can't call it a moon mission yet because it's only 1965 and we haven't landed on the moon yet, they would have sounded ridiculously pedantic. Right. So, but also the other side of it is that we know that there is an intelligence, and Tom, you just said it, we have human intelligence. And what we're trying to do with artificial intelligence is to create artificially the same kind of thing that we know already exists in humans. And there's nothing wrong with calling it that. It's like artificial flight. It's like artificial rapid mobility. It's like artificial picture, anything anything you can think of. And to take this a step further, what makes contemporary artificial intelligence really interesting is that it actually does draw on how human brains work with neurons and connections and pattern recognition and all of that. And now all of a sudden, people are saying, well, no, what the computers do isn't really intelligence. The human intelligence is so much different. No, it's not. There isn't some magical thing that humans do that cannot possibly be emulated by a computer. And the kind of things that humans do are, in fact, exactly the kind of things that computers are doing now. And really, it's a question of getting the hardware right, getting the way we set up these connections between neurons right, getting the different types of neurons right, getting the kinds of experience right, getting kinds of input and output modalities right, those sorts of things. There's just nothing magical about human intelligence. And that's the big lesson we all have to learn here.
Although I think I'm going to emphasize the word you said, emulating. I don't think they're necessarily self-conscious and aware in the sense that some people like to pretend they are.
Not right now, but why can't they be? There's nothing that says they can't be, and they probably will be.
I'm a little skeptical of that, just because.
But on what grounds? You don't have grounds for it.
I don't know. I'm willing to be proven wrong on that. The thing I don't like about it at this stage is, you know why IBM gave up artificial intelligence, a lot of its artificial intelligence research, because of course they were the pioneers originally in the 60s, was because their salesmen kept coming back to the head office and saying, this is freaking out the customers. We can't sell these computers because they're afraid they're going to become self-aware. And so they literally gave up the program, and it kind of went fallow. I mean, it really became sort of a winter of artificial intelligence for quite a while because of, they lost that support. But it moved to the.
Well, so rather
really
than trying to discuss,
rather
than trying to discuss this, topic, which is fraught with, well, it would go on for hours. It does sort of point us, though, at the ethical use of large language models. And I really want us to, get to that topic.
I just want to make it clear that the main thing I'm concerned about is getting past the fear factor. And it's not that I think that a self-aware artificial intelligence is going to be good or bad or any of the above. I'm not really worried about that, to be honest. Again, I look at it as a useful tool. So I'm sorry, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah.
Well, it's just that, a lot of the academics that I work with have the fear of AI,
and that's
and don't
counterproductive.
want to interact with it. And so my concern is for us to get the language of how it can be used ethically. You know, they always bring up the energy consumption and the water use, and you know, they have 1,000 reasons why they don't need to learn this. But from my point of view, as a student support advocate, as a lifelong learner advocate, I think that academics need to engage with large language models and learn how to use them, at least to the point where they can support their students. They don't have to like them, they don't have to use them in their own work, but they have to me, they need to be aware of them. And so I'd like, Stephen, if you could speak to the ethical use, especially in you know, education, not necessarily institutional education, you know, because you and I are both outside of, well, I'm adjacent, but we're outside of, you know, educational institutions. But if you could speak to the ethical use of large language models.
Hey, Mark, you know what's coming, but Tom and Bryan, you might not like this. But let me speak ever so briefly first about environmental, because I ran the numbers, and the environmental impact of AI is the same as the environmental impact of drinking our coffee in the morning. You know, obviously it's
No, I know it may surprise you, but I think in many ways this is massively overblown, and
of
also
course it is.
And
often
crypto is much worse.
crypto is far
Well-
worse. But also this often comes from people who are not actually looking at carbon footprint in general or climate. This is just one thing. I'll say more about this later. Please, Stephen, continue.
But yeah, I mean, like the people objecting to AI on environmental grounds aren't really objecting to it on environmental grounds because they, in their very lives, do all kinds of other things that consume much, much more power, right? Crypto's a separate thing. Tom, you're absolutely right. Crypto is a ridiculous and irresponsible waste of energy resources. But crypto isn't AI, so crypto, I mean, we could talk about that, but that's off topic. No, where I want to go with this, I often introduce the discussion this way. People talk as though ethics is solved, that we know what is ethical and what is not ethical. And that is not true. It is demonstrably not true. And I show in the course, I show definitively that it's not true by looking at the different codes of ethics for different professions and noting that there is not one single ethical value, not one, that is common to all of them. And that's just speaking of broad terms. You take any one of these ethical values and you narrow it down to what that actually means in practice, and any sort of consensus really breaks down. So, you know, we should not kill other people really resolves to we should not kill other people without the proper paperwork. And then we get into debates about what the paperwork is, right? Because nobody really believes that we should not kill other people, end of statement. Right? You should never lie unless you have a good reason. You know, accountability is a fundamental value of society, except we have to be able to preserve privacy. So there's that. Now we look at, okay, well, how do we come up with ethical values in the first place, anyways? There are the different theories of ethics. Of course, they're all based on different fundamental values. Utilitarianism on the promotion of good and happiness, virtue ethics on the qualities of a virtuous person, duty and deontology, inherent value of a person, and the principle of what if everybody else did it, the categorical imperative. There are different approaches to ethics, contractarian types of theories, which aren't really ethical theories, properly so called. And Mark mentions the dialectical method. We can even take this into methods of reasoning. What counts as an effective method of reason? Is the dialectic actually a principle of logic, or is it just made up fancy stuff by Hegel? Forget all of that. Where do ethics really come from? How do we determine what ethics really are? Two approaches. One approach, as Wittgenstein said, the best way to determine that a person believes that the ice is solid is to observe whether or not the person walks on the ice or not. What people believe is ethical is seen in what they do, because people behave typically in what they believe is an ethical way. And people don't go around saying, oh, yeah, I'm the villain, I'm just doing bad stuff. Nobody thinks they're doing bad stuff. As the old saying goes, everyone thinks they're the hero of their own story, right? And they all think, even Trump thinks he's doing the right thing insofar as he thinks about right and wrong. The other side of it is, how does a person come up with ethical values? There's the concept originates probably in the writings of David Hume, and to a degree as well in the writings of Adam Smith, about a sentiment or a sense of ethics. And this is a physical sensation of rightness and wrongness. Now, where does that physical sensation arise? Well, it's not a natural, it's not like everybody has this magical ethical sense, because that would be ridiculous. And besides that, if we did, it would kind of all converge into the same thing, right? But people do have what might be called a sensation of, a sentiment of rightness and wrongness, right? This can be based on whatever. It's based on what they've learned through their lives, based on their totality of their experiences. And in the same way, the totality of individual actions in a society create what might be considered to be the ethics or the ethos of that society. It's not something that you can pin down as a set of rules. It's not some sort of set of principles that you enunciate them and then everybody will follow them and then they will be ethical, because as soon as you have a set of rules, the question comes up, well, yeah, we have a set of rules, why should I follow them, right? And the ethics is in the question of why, right? The reason, yeah, exactly, right? So this is the part you're not going to like. The ethics, we look at what AI produces and we say, oh my goodness, that's not ethical. We have to guide the responsible use of AI. We have to guide AI so that it's responsible. But what AI is doing is revealing to us what we already believe is ethical, and we do not like it one bit, right? As it is a matter of fact in our society that we think cheating is right.
I'm not at all offended by anything you've said so far, but I just want to make that clear.
All right. Well, a lot of people are, because a lot of people think ethics is agreed on, that it's a certain set of rules or values, and we can list them, right? Beneficence, non-maleficence, sharing, trust, honesty,
Chaotic neutral.
accountability, whatever. Yeah, right. Which is not true, right? It's not true that these are commonly held ethical values. And it is not true that our actual behavior in society conforms to those values. So what's actually happening here is the people who are saying we should guide AI to be ethical are saying we should guide society to be ethical in such and such a way. And suggesting that ethics, which they assume is universally believed to be whatever they believe it to be, should be applied to all of society as reflected. They're trying to, what's the word for it? Jigger the output, right? They're trying to make it look like the AI is being ethical in a certain way.
So can we turn this around and
let's turn it around. Go for it.
So can we turn this around and explore the idea that AI can show us a mirror of our own ethical realities in a way that may be uncomfortable, but then again, all learning is uncomfortable. I mean, you can't learn if you're not uncomfortable at some level, which is something, again, I have a lot of trouble communicating to my students because they want the safe way through my class.
Well, we could talk about the reason why they want the safe way through their class. It's
Oh, yeah,
not that they don't value education. It's just that education has been commodified and you're offering
exactly.
them a service in
Yeah.
exchange for anything else.
Yeah, and which is why I say, I mean, I wrote a blog last year when people are all freaking out, or a couple of years ago when people were all freaking out over students using Chat GPT to cheat. And I said, well, the problem is not so much that they're cheating their learning, they're cheating the system. And that means we need to look at the system and why
Yeah.
that promotes that, again, that activity on their part.
Yeah.
And ChatGPT highlights the complete absurdities of the system in a way that a lot of educators are unwilling to face, particularly when it comes to things like grading and the industrial model of students as products. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you're absolutely right. They've spent thousands of dollars and hundreds of hours trying to learn. It's not that they don't value learning, it's that they see what you're doing as getting in the way of that. And when you're asking people to submit papers that they'll be grading.
Yeah.
So yeah, AI is a mirror. That's what people don't like about it. You know, I mean, it's not a copy. It's kind of ironic, just as an aside, it's kind of ironic that the same people who are saying that AI is biased and all of that are also complaining that AI is copying their work, which would entail that their work is all biased. So
Exactly.
but
It occurs to me that AI is not just a mirror, but as a person who studied optics and worked with it for decades, AI is like a funhouse mirror because
yeah,
of the stochasticity, right? Because of the randomness, which is built in.
It's a prism.
It becomes well, it becomes a funhouse mirror,
Yeah.
and you're really onto it there, Stephen, where it is looking backward, and I see it as an opportunity for especially higher education to take a good look at itself and say, yeah, maybe that 500-word essay once a week isn't really the best learning model, the disposable assignment, as it were.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, right? AI is a very specialized mirror in that it cares not one whit about the content, but it goes back to what I said to start this off. The connotation of something is in the receiver, right? The meaning of the words isn't in the words. The meaning of the words is in the person who is reading the words, right? The words are just markings on paper. I see Bryan shrugging, but we can talk about that if we want. What AI is doing is picking up the words, is picking up properties of the words and not the meanings. That's why it quote unquote hallucinates, right? So it's not copying the content. It is looking at the content and noticing facts about the words. And the specific facts are related to the ordering of the words. And the thing is, the ordering of the words is very revealing because the ordering of the words, when presented to us anew, conveys in us thoughts and meanings that when we read as AI saying something to us. But again, the words don't contain the meaning is in our head. So, and that's why I say it's not copying. And so, yeah, AI can teach us. It's not a mirror exactly, but it's a really interesting way of recognizing patterns in our words that are very revealing, such that when we look at them, it's like we're looking at a stochastic pattern or image and seeing these patterns emerge from it. And that teaches us things about what we believe. It teaches us things about what we think other people believe. And these, to the extent that these patterns are accurate reflections of the words that were fed into it, if they haven't been dithered in some way, then we are actually learning. And I think that when we look at these words and we recoil because the AI is, behaving, it's like Tay, the Nazi Microsoft AI, the chatbot. We realize, oh yeah, no, that's not a good thing about society. And it leads to the possibility, and I predicted this in the course, and I still think it's going to come, what I call deontic AI, AI that teaches us lessons about what is right and what is wrong. And so ultimately, there may be some ethical good coming from AI, but it's not going to be produced by us making AI ethical in that way. As an aside, just to be clear about my position, I don't disagree with preventing AI from spouting Nazi slogans. Right. I don't think there should be libertarian values applied to AI so that it can do whatever it wants. But I don't think that there's some magical thing whereby AI takes purely ethical content in and converts it into unethical content out. It's reflecting, not creating.
Before we bounce back to that mirror, I'm struck by your aside, Stephen, for two reasons. One is I'm fascinated by the idea of AI as a teacher to humans in this ethical sense, in this deontological sense. And the second is it seems the strong critique of AI that we've seen from people like Helen Beetham, Audrey Waters, what's his name in Chicago, who wrote the anti-AI software, Glaze and Nightshade. The argument being that generative AI is basically so inherently bad. I don't mean problematic. I mean just vile. You've all heard the list of problems with it. Then we shouldn't engage with it at all. And you seem to have a quite a different view on both of those points. Where unless I'm not following you clearly, but please go ahead.
Okay, well. Yeah, no, I've read these and I've responded to them, and there's a number of writers who've gotten some currency, and the argument is out there, and there's a lot of reasons for people to believe in these arguments, but there isn't a single argument that they're applying, right? So you kind of need to go through it point by point, because the same person will, in the same article, write about the environmental consequences. They'll write about capitalism and the exploitation of human labor, the dehumanization of people, the learning loss and unwillingness to learn, and the whole series of them, right? But plagiarism, copyright issues, right? But they're not all based on a single critique of AI. There isn't a single consistent critique of AI being applied here. It's almost like a scattergun where, here's a point, here's a point, here's a point, here's a point. And so we have to address each of these points individually.
So I could see us going another hour around censorship and ideology and a lot of topics that I feel are trying to bubble up, but I really want us to get to the duty of care. So back to higher education and the appropriate use, whatever it is. I say the responsible use of AI. I'd like to hear your thoughts around that because we do have to wrap this in less than an hour.
Yeah, the duty of care. That's a lovely topic. And it's a lovely topic because the thinking behind the duty of care does inform so many of these critiques. And so many of these critics who then use the scattergun, but a lot of them are motivated by the thinking behind the duty of care. And I'll be frank, I have a lot of sympathy with this point of view. First of all, we have to separate two separate concepts. There's duty of care in a legal sense, right? A person has a legal duty of care. You can't just drive recklessly down the highway. You have a duty of care to other people. Even if you don't cause an accident, you still have a duty of care. Professionally, this becomes even more the case where if you become a doctor, dentist, whatever, you have a responsibility, a duty to care about the outcome of whatever the treatment is that you're undertaking. That's a legal concept. There's a different concept that comes from feminist philosophy. And that's a duty of care that arises when you're in a position where you have, to begin with, two people where one is in a dependent relationship with another. The paradigm instance here is the mother and the child, right? And so there's a duty of the mother to care for the child. And it's a duty that doesn't arise by any sort of set of principles or theories or anything like that. It arises strictly and solely in the nature of the relationship between the mother and the child. It's this interactiveness, it's this actually being joined, and it's the sort of duty that can only be recognized by the fact of being in that relationship. And so it's something that is kind of a privileged perspective or place of observation. And so you get people who have written about this include people like Carol Gilligan and Bell Hooks. Those are the two names. There's a bunch of others that I mentioned on the course as well. And they draw this out, right? And it makes a lot of sense to me. One of the implications of it's sort of almost like an extension of the principle, nothing about me without me, where the responsibility that a person has toward a person in their care isn't just one that they impose on the person that's in their care, but there has to be an interaction and an exchange back and forth in order to determine what is, in this particular context, in this particular circumstance, the right thing. And the right thing is defined not only by the carer, but also the cared for. So there's all of that. Now, what's really interesting about this particular relationship is that it's also a relationship that exists, if you will, and I'm stretching for words here and I'm distorting it in some important ways, but outside the marketplace, outside the workplace, outside the realm of transactions. This is not a transactional relationship in any sense or form, right? The mother doesn't care for the child just because she thinks the child will eventually respond to her in kind, right? It isn't that kind of relationship at all. Nor should the relationship between other people in a caring position in society, right? The care that a doctor takes for the health of the patient should not depend on the economic or the commercial interaction between the doctor and the patient, right? Even if it is one, right? Even if it's like the US system where you have to pay for doctors, nonetheless, the duty that a doctor has isn't created by that payment. It's created by the relation of dependency between one person and another. The patient is putting themselves in the hands of the doctor. And that fact, that relationship creates this duty. Now, where does that come from? What I see, and this is just me seeing this, right? And this is not necessarily a statement of fact about the theory of duty of care, but what I see is a similarity between the care as felt by the mother for the child and the sense of ethics as talked about by people like Smith and Hume, right? It's a perception that because of this relationship that we're into, and especially a relationship of somebody who's in a position of power and somebody who's dependent, that sensation is what creates the ethics of the situation, right? And it's important to recognize that it's a sensation. It's something that they feel, that they perceive. It's not an abstract theoretical quantity. It's based in the embodiment, the fact of the relation. This, by the way, as an aside, Tom, is where the really interesting argument about the distinction between humans and computers comes into play, right? How important is embodiment with respect to consciousness, and in particular, consciousness with respect to ethics? They're all related, right?
Sure.
I think that's pretty undeniable, right? And that's the strand of truth that I think the duty of care theorists have found truly important. You know, ethics is in the concrete, not the abstract. And the moment we begin to abstract it, we begin to commodify it, we begin to turn it into something that can be bought and sold. But ethics isn't something that can be bought and sold. You can't buy goodness. It's like buying indulgences, right? Everybody understood there was something fundamentally wrong with that.
Well, one of the
So-
reasons that the American healthcare system is so broken is because of the dichotomy between the duty of care that the physician has to the patient and the cost structure that says, okay, that patient then needs to be soaked for whatever we can get out of them. And as I tell my students when I teach healthcare as part of my government course, that you can't squeeze water from a rock. If what if somebody comes in with stage 3 cancer, you treat them and they die? Where's that money going to come from? Well, it gets spread over the rest of the system, and that is why the system is so expensive. Not because there's some sort of administrative blow. I mean, there's administrative issues, but that's kind of marginal. The really big issue is just the number of uninsured who get expensive care because we have a duty to care for them as a society, and that doesn't align with capitalism.
Yeah, it's funny because, I mean, I'm going to say yes and no there. There's a big difference between being a doctor for the money and being a doctor to help people, right? And in the US, the system is biased towards being a doctor for the money. In Canada, we still pay doctors.
Yeah.
You're right. There's no question here of not paying doctors, right? But the system selects more for people who are in it because they want to help patients. So, and
of course, our system forces them into that money thing because medical school is so ridiculously expensive, which gets back into Bryan's books world.
Yeah. So let's bring this back to the professor and the learner. The healthcare is a completely separate issue. So if we can, we're going to have to wrap this up. But I know, Tom, I like that ending question. But first, let's bring this back to the power dynamic, the relationship between the bestower of knowledge and certification and the learner. So let me turn it back to Stephen, and before Bryan can get in here too.
Well, I want to add a thing to your question. There is, I had somebody ask me this morning, what do I think education is going to look like in 15 years? I'd like to know what Stephen thinks and how that relates to this intersection of duty of care, AI, open education, and the evolution of the closed educational system. How do you see all the stew percolating out in the next decade to decade and a half?
Well, that's assuming we don't have a world war, right?
Oh, let's assume that doesn't.
That's assuming we don't have global ecological collapse. I mean, there's so much that could happen with all the other instabilities, and frankly, these instabilities, when and if they happen, are going to have a huge impact on education. Look what happened during the pandemic. That was a minor event, right? Compared to the influenza pandemic, this was nothing. And yet it completely upended the educational system. So part of your question is, when you put it to 15 years, the first thing I have to ask is, are we going to have another one of those events in 15 years, or is it going to take 18 years, 20 years? I don't know, right? I don't know.
I think the combination of climate change and AI are slow-moving pandemics.
They're slow moving. Well, I don't know if AI is a pandemic, but I
I
get
mean,
your
in the
point.
sense of a change agent,
Yeah,
in terms of the effect it had.
yeah. We have a wildly unpredictable change agent in the U.S. White House right
Oh
now.
yeah, I know,
Like,
I know.
4 years from now, we might find that all universities have been disbanded and there is no education that is not private schools. There's what they just cut several $100 million worth of funding from Columbia University because uh, they didn't take the right political stance. So okay.
Yes, if we could get to
So
AI
let's
and higher education.
let's do another netherworld. So absent any of these changes, we're not going to see a significant change in the system because the system preserves itself. Right. The nature of the change is probably going to determine how the system responds. Probably the nature of the change will be such that people can no longer attend in large numbers at a physical campus such as a university. All kinds of reasons why that might be the case. Whether that happens in 15 years or not, I don't know. But plan on that. Right? Plan on it being the case that the United States and possibly Europe and possibly Canada enters into an era where they're like the rest of the world, where it's really problematic to attend a university campus in person. That changes the economics completely because now you can no longer charge $100,000 tuition. It changes the dynamics because now education isn't about secret societies and fraternities and forming networks and all of that. It becomes something very different. We have a bunch of different needs that are going to arise. We're going to have the networking need. We're going to have the knowledge creation need. We're going to have the socialization need, the creation of communities need. All of these are going to evolve separately. All of these are going to take the form in one way or another of services that are available to us in our normal at home or at work environment. Many of those will be digitally offered. Many people have been predicting the disaggregation of educational services. They've predicted that for many years. That sort of event will cause it. Absent the event, we don't have the effect. But if we have that event, we'll have that effect. And I'd put, well, can't put money on it because money might be one of those events. But you know what I mean. I'm pretty sure that's what's going to happen, right? But it'll be a big event that puts into place all of these things that have been developing slowly over time. And then we can just talk about what kind of event we're going to get. What's the result going to be? Which is more Bryan's department, but it's something I think about a lot too.
Bryan, jump in here if you would, please.
Do we have 2 hours? Tom's question took us off in a completely different direction than I was expecting.
Sorry.
If we're trying to think about how to implement AI in higher education under some sense of a duty of care, I think we're making good progress through Stephen's evocation of some strands of feminist thinking on this. I think if we start talking about existential threats or major geopolitical crises, or major strategic incidents that can impact us, I think that's a whole other show. There's a lot we can talk about that we haven't mentioned. Any of the other existential challenges which face the human race, including supervolcanoes, including some of the tipping points for climate. I mean, we could go on for some time.
Yeah, well, so
I guess what I'm
skipping the
curious about
asteroid impact, I'm more interested in just what we're actually facing, not the speculative stuff that's so much fun, but
Well,
just
I would
the
say,
trends that you follow, Bryan, that you've followed for decades, based on those trends and this emergence of so much machine tools, digital tools, that's what I'm interested in as sort of ending on here.
well, again, that would, if we're talking about that in terms of this connection of doing AI ethically and doing the standard of care, I think there's a question that I would pose to all of you, which is, how can we do this if higher education is such a shambles right now? And we're not even talking about the disaster facing Canadian higher education, with the government deciding to just massively cut international students. So you've got program cuts and closures going on across the provinces, especially in Ontario. I mean, a couple of years ago, we had a forum where a brilliant librarian said we shouldn't even use generative AI right now, simply because it is too not only is it too problematic, but we would be assisting it, we would be making it stronger in using it. I don't agree, but that's one strong point. If higher education right now is so ethically confused, so hypocritical, such a shambles, I don't know now where this leaves us for using AI. Um, Especially it seems like something that we're not ready for in this understanding. Well, alternatively, should we start doing it because it'll be a great spur to our development? It'll show us, if we can follow the mirror analogy further, it'll show us ourselves more clearly, and we can take the work of redesign and reimagination more seriously. Um, what do you think, Stephen?
Well, okay, at first I want to make the point that the US education system and the Canadian education system are very different.
Yeah, no kidding.
And it's true that both are facing a crisis, but it's a completely different crisis.
Yeah.
Right. In Canada, we got a lot of funding from international students. Now we don't, so we have to readjust. But there's no sense that any of our educational institutions are going to collapse as a result of it. The educational system is provided for the most part by the government. Our government is not going to disappear. Therefore, our educational system is not going to disappear. You know, that's a different kind of threat than the one that's happening in the US, where what's happening in the US is so complex that I can hardly get to it. I can hardly deal with it in any sort of just way. But I think there are many ways in which it's far more existential than the Canadian system. But the core of the remark is the suggestion that we're not prepared to deal with the implications of AI, and maybe we shouldn't use it because of that. And I think that's true, but I think it's true in a different way than you think. And because of the different way, I think that, again, we come back to AI being a good thing. Here's what we're not prepared for. What we're not prepared for is everybody can suddenly write a lot better than they could. Everybody can suddenly program a lot better than they could. Everybody can suddenly do research a lot better than they could. They can draw pictures, even if they have no artistic ability whatsoever. They can create screenplays, entire videos, even though they've had no training in the field. I could go on, but you get the idea. There's a huge democratization of capacity that happens if AI becomes widely available. Just as when the internet first came out, there was a huge democratization of capacity of reading and writing and publishing and interacting with each other, which in itself created a social revolution that we're still dealing with. That's what's going to happen with AI. The stuff that formerly only a small percentage of people could do, now everybody can do. Everybody being defined as all those with access to AI. from where I sit, the efforts to limit access to AI are efforts to limit the creation of this capacity. And that's the reason why. There's the perception on the part of a certain set of people that people in society just aren't sophisticated enough to handle this. We have to protect them from it. And I would normally be sympathetic, but the problem is I'm more concerned about being protected from the people who would protect us from AI. They're the ones that I'm less confident in.
Who are those? Who are those would-be protectors?
The people who say morality is solved. You know, the people who say, I have a set of values and these are the values that all of society should follow. Those sorts of people.
So that could be people on the left and people on the right.
Could be people on the left, could be people on the right. Yep. I'm equally suspicious of both of them. You know, fundamentally, I mean, this is where I'm different from, and I identify as a socialist and a leftist, but fundamentally, this is where I'm different from many, and that is I have more trust in people than I have trust in the people who say they're protecting the people. That's such a bad way of putting it, though. And in the back of my mind, institutions matter, all of that. And I don't deny that either. But centralized institutions are a problem. I mean, even there, I want to be careful. I mean, because there are some kinds of centralization. It's complex, and I know it's complex, and I'm trying not to simplify it, trying not to oversimplify it. But maybe that's what I fear most are the people who are oversimplifying it. The people who are saying, here's the fix, right? We just don't use AI. There's the fix, right? Or we just make sure that all AI is non-biased. There's the fix. Or, you know, or we just eliminate government. There's the fix. Right, all of that is ridiculous, and even something like we just decentralize. There's the fix. Well, if that was true, then blockchain would be wonderful, but it's not. Right? It's complex. It's complex. It's concrete. It depends on relations between individuals. It depends on the creation of communities. All the stuff that breaks this down is the stuff that we have to worry about.
I think that note of complexity and the difficulty of the challenges that we're facing is a good place to leave this week's episode of Talking with Machines.